of different cultures, of different civilizations, have always been challenged by our destiny. Every civilization in the path of mankind rose and fell, succeeded and failed. What we learn from history is that every civilization will eventually collapse. Collapse doesn't mean an end. It's basically a loss of complexity. It implies a new and in many respects promising beginning. We know that ancient Egyptian civilization is the oldest, the first complex society in the history of mankind. How such a complex civilization could come into being is the question that hasn't been solved so far. Based on our latest research, we can say and prove quite convincingly that ancient Egyptian civilization came into being very, very far away from the Nile Valley. Namely in the area of Gilf Kebir, which lies about 400 to 500 kilometers west of the River Nile. Nowadays we can say that the ancient Egyptian civilization came into being more than 2,000 years earlier than we supposed. Means big or large barrier, which reflects the fact that Gilf Kebir is a huge mountain range reaching a height of about 1,000 meters above sea level, located at the southwestern border of Egypt with Libya and Sudan. Today, Gilf Kebir area is one of the driest places on the planet, yet 8,000 years ago it was densely populated, and we have to ask ourselves, what happened? Especially in the 7th and 6th millennia BC. It was an area that was densely populated by small tribes of cattle herders. Green, we can compare it to modern images of savannas in some regions of Africa. During the 6th millennium BC, however, a major climatic change occurred, which resulted in very quick drying of the whole area of Gilf Kebir and eventually made these populations move in the direction of the Nile Valley and after a couple of centuries settle down in the Nile Valley. It's very difficult for us to imagine that these cattle herders were able to create mental concepts, philosophy, and religious images that later on became some of the pillars of ancient Egyptian culture, civilization, religion, and identity. Quite recently, a new cave was discovered that throws a completely new light on the history of ancient Egyptian civilization. It's the Cave of the Beasts. The center of the decorated wall in the cave is occupied by a very unique scene. This is a composition that is known also from ancient Egypt. Ancient Egyptians considered the Milky Way to be the goddess of the sky, Nut. When you observe the night sky, you can see that the Milky Way is basically covering the whole horizon. It starts on Earth and ends on Earth, a kind of a bridge. Representations of Nut from ancient Egypt are known from papyri, from sarcophagi. If you visit several of the royal tombs of the 18th and 19th dynasties, you can see that especially in the burial chambers of several of the 19th dynasty kings, the Nut is represented not in a similar, but in an identical way, overarching the earth. Probably one of the most important and unique scenes represents a chieftain holding a mace in his raised hand and smiting an enemy who is portrayed upside down. Individual segments of these scenes are so characteristic of much later ancient Egyptian fashion of rendering king killing the enemies of Egypt that we can say that this is the oldest representation of this scene. This scene is 2000 years older than the first similar scene known from ancient Egyptian civilization from the Nile Valley. Another piece of unique evidence is provided by the Cave of the Swimmers, discovered almost a century ago by a famous desert explorer and spy for the German army, Laszlo Almásy. Hidden in a very distant part of this cave is a small red-painted figure of a running chieftain that can be directly related to much later ritual run of the king. And a closer look shows that this composition is not missing any single element that is so characteristic for much later composition of the running king. It features a white painted crown associated with Upper Egypt. It features insignia of the royal run, and even the attitude of the running chieftain is identical to much later compositions that we have attested, for instance, from the famous pyramid complex of Djoser, which is the first ever built pyramid complex out of stone and dating to the 3rd dynasty. These caves, by means of the represented decoration, functioned as a kind of a meeting point, as a transitional zone between the profane world and the world shared exclusively by the gods. For the local populations living there, it was a very difficult decision to move out of their known used territory and to proceed towards the Nile Valley. They had to cover more than 400 kilometers, more than 300 miles. You really have to develop an appreciation and high respect for these populations, how they decided to cope with the destiny, and eventually create from a collapse, from a very critical situation for the populations, something that became during the 3rd millennium BC one of the earliest empires on earth, the Old Kingdom of the Pyramid Builders, when the huge pyramids of Giza, Abusir, and Saqqara were constructed. You can ask yourself, what can we learn from this fascinating story? The origins of these civilizations can be used as a very nice example of how our intellect, our brain, can cope with collapse. History, and in particular archaeology, can bring dozens and dozens of examples when society was faced with what we call collapse, managed to undergo this intermediate rebuilding stage and to catch a breath and reach a new positive development, reach new peak, and even to shape a much more effective, sophisticated society. Collapse is an opportunity. Collapse is a challenge to test the abilities of mankind to fight the destiny.